Right. Good evening. Um, let's see. It looks like we have several participants already joining us and maybe some more that will continue to join us. So I might just wait 20 seconds and then get started. Okay. Well, we'll get started. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting for the Los Angeles Coastal Area Special Resource Study. My name is Sarah Bodo. I'm a project manager with the Denver Service Center Planning Division within the National Park Service. I'd like to thank all of you who are joining us today for your interest and for taking the time to participate in this meeting. So today I will present an overview of the Special Resource Study. And in addition to introducing the study, the purpose of the meeting is to explain what criteria the National Park Service will consider in the study process and to answer any questions that you might have. We will also invite you to share your feedback about the study. So how this virtual meeting will work is that I'll go through a slideshow presentation that you can view through this video conferencing platform that we're using, which is Microsoft Teams. However, if you prefer to follow along with your own copy, you can find a copy of this presentation posted on the study website. And I'll pull up a slide in a moment just to show how to access that slideshow. I'm also going to provide a brief technical orientation so everyone knows some key functions of Microsoft Teams. We are recording this meeting so that anyone who misses tonight's meeting has the opportunity to watch it. Tonight's presentation will be the same as the presentation that we did on February 11th, and a recording of that public meeting is already available on the project website. So the recording of this meeting will be posted in about a week or so to the website. All right, you should all see the presentation slides on your screen right now. And this welcome slide also has an image of the ocean with Manhattan Beach in the background. Okay. I would also like to introduce two additional Park Service staff who you'll see during our question and answer session following the presentation. Carrie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Carrie Miller. I'm a program analyst for special studies for Congress. I work within the Park Planning Facilities and Lands Directorate in the Washington Support Office for the National Park Service.
Thanks, Carrie. And Wes, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Wes Mize. I'm a cultural resource specialist working with Sarah in the National Park Service's Denver Service Center Planning Division.
Thank you, Wes. They'll join us again once we finish the presentation. All right. On this slide, it's titled Meeting Goals. So our goals tonight are first to introduce the special resource study and explain why the National Park Service is conducting this study. Then we'll move to an explanation of the study process and answer some common questions, including what is the study area and what are the criteria that we use to do this evaluation, as well as what is the timeline. We'll also invite you to share your feedback and we'll explain how to do so. The presentation takes about 30 minutes and then we'll use the remaining time to answer your questions. I want to add that we're holding this meeting because you may have information and perspectives about locations being considered in the study. And public meetings like this one are really a critical component of the study process. So thank you for those of you that have already provided information related to the study and for those of you that helped get the word out about these meetings and the public comment period. We really do welcome your feedback and thank you so much for your interest. All right, on this slide, we have an image of the project website. So for anyone who wishes to download a copy of today's presentation, here's how to do this. If you go to a link which one of my colleagues will post in the chat, it's also shown on this slide, parkplanning.nps.gov/Los Angeles Coastal. That is our project homepage. And on the left-hand side of the homepage, you should see a link called Document List. And that's circled in red on the slide. And if you click on that link, you'll be able to access a copy of the presentation. It's called Public Meeting Presentation February 2026. All right, moving on to a brief technical orientation. For this event, we're using Microsoft Teams. We'd like to give you a brief overview of some of the key functions. So on this slide, an arrow points to the volume adjustment button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and the closed captioning button, which is on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. We also have a real live person providing closed captioning today. To view her closed captions, my colleague will add a link into the Q&A now. All right. Finally, an important feature for this meeting is the Q&A function. So this is how you can interact with us after the presentation by entering questions. And this should be found at the upper right-hand corner of the screen, where the white arrow points to an icon that in the shape of 2 dialog bubbles, which allows you to turn the Q&A on or off. This will become a bit more relevant later once we conclude our presentation and open up the meeting for questions. And we'll also provide instructions on this once we conclude the presentation. I won't be responding to questions until the end of the presentation since we have so much information to share, and we may answer some of the questions that you have over the course of the presentation. But once we wrap up, we're more than happy to address any additional questions that you have or provide more clarification for anything that we mentioned. All right, so that was our technical overview. To start our presentation, we'll take a look at a quick overview of the National Park System. So the National Park Service manages 433 individual units with various designations such as national parks, national historic sites, national monuments, national lakeshores, and many others. These units are commonly referred to as units within the National Park System. The map on this slide shows the green dots and the green areas that represent units in the National Park System. So special resource studies like this one are directed by legislation, and they provide valuable information for Congress to consider about whether to add a new unit to the National Park System. All right, on this slide titled, "What is a special resource study?" So special resource studies, which is the project we're doing, they are designed to provide Congress with non-binding information about the resource qualities in the study area and their eligibility to be designated as a unit of the National Park System or other special designation. So special resource studies evaluate the area using existing established criteria. These studies are prepared for the Secretary of the Interior, who will submit the study along with any recommendations to Congress for consideration. An important point to note is that the study itself does not establish new park units. Only Congress, through legislation, or the President, through use of the Antiquities Act, has the authority to establish a new unit of the National Park System. So when this study is completed by us and it is transmitted to Congress, nothing more will happen until Congress or the President takes action, if either chooses to do so at any point in the future. If they don't take action, it's possible that nothing will happen as a result of this study. Another brief note, when we say our terminology, when we say park units, so internally for the National Park Service management, we call every type of unit a park for shorthand. So when we say the study evaluates sites as a potential park unit, this doesn't suggest that the site would be officially designated a national park, but rather that it would become part of the National Park System. The official name and designation of an area or site would be assigned by Congress or the president at that time, and the study doesn't make any recommendations on that matter. All right, this slide is why is the National Park Service conducting this study? So the answer is that Public Law 117-328 directs the Secretary of Interior to conduct this study to determine the suitability and feasibility of the Los Angeles coastal area as a unit of the National Park System. And then the Department of Interior charged the National Park Service with the preparation of this study, and the study team has been tasked with its completion. And on this slide, we also show an image of the first page of the law authorizing the study. All right, on this slide titled Preliminary Study Area, which also includes a map. So first I'll read the text there. So and this is from the legislation. So the legislation defines the study area as the coastline and adjacent areas to the Santa Monica Bay from Will Rogers State Beach to Torrance Beach, including the areas in and around Ballona Creek and the Baldwin Hills, and the San Pedro section of the City of Los Angeles, excluding the Port of Los Angeles north of Crescent Avenue. So that, starting from that legislation, the study boundary is depicted in red on this map on the screen, and it comes from that description from the law. I'll also note that the study area is focused on public lands within that description, while excluding private residences and other private properties. So the boundary, if you look at the map, the line going north to south starts at Will Rogers State Beach in the north and goes all the way down to Torrance Beach in the south, as well as the coastline in San Pedro. And the coastline is interpreted as the area from mean high tide line of the sea to the first block of urban development or Pacific Coast Highway. So the study area includes the beach areas and public lands while excluding private property in that area. The study area for the coastline in San Pedro runs from Royal Palms Beach Park in the west to in the east to where Crescent Avenue would intersect the coastline. In addition to the coastline, the study area includes Ballona Creek and Bike Path, Ballona Wetlands Ecological Preserve, and the Baldwin Hills. So this is the study area described by legislation with, to the best of our knowledge, private lands removed. If you are aware of public lands that are not within this boundary, but that you feel would be important for the study team to evaluate, please feel free to make a suggestion in your comments on our website. Also note that property owners may also request that we not include their property within the study boundary. And as we continue to collect information and with your feedback, we will further refine the study area. All right, let's move on to the criteria. So congressional legislation and National Park Service policy require using the following criteria to evaluate the study area. And the study area must meet all 4 criteria. So the first one is the area must contain nationally significant resources. Second, it must be suitable. Third, it must be feasible as a potential unit of the National Park System. And fourth, it must require direct management by the National Park Service. All 4 criteria must be met in order for the study area to have an overall positive finding. And then I'll explain these criteria further on the next slides. All right, so the first criterion is focused on national significance. The study area must contain nationally significant natural and/or cultural resources. And I have 2 slides on this criterion. So for cultural resources, National Historic Landmark criteria are applied to determine whether a site is nationally significant. And then we'll have a team of historians confer to determine whether the site meets the high standards set by the National Historic Landmark criteria. I would also like to note that this analysis does not lead to National Historic Landmark designation, but rather the landmark criteria are used for the purposes of the study as an evaluation tool. And on this slide, we have a photo of the Point Loma Lighthouse, which is a National Historic Landmark in Cabrillo National Monument, California. All right. In turn, natural resources must meet all of the criteria listed on this slide to be considered nationally significant. So first, they must be an outstanding example of a particular type of resource. It must also possess exceptional value or quality in illustrating or interpreting the natural or cultural themes of our nation's heritage. It must also offer superlative opportunities for public enjoyment or for scientific study. And it must retain a high degree of integrity as a true, accurate, and relatively unspoiled example of a resource. And as an example, the photo on this slide shows the Waco Mammoth National Monument, fossils there, which did meet all of the criteria, and the area was eventually designated as a national monument. All right, moving on to criterion 2. So this criterion requires that a site represent a natural or cultural resource that is not already adequately represented in the national park system, or a site or resource that is not comparably represented and protected for public enjoyment by another land managing entity. So in other words, the question we will ask when evaluating this criteria is, would designating the area make it redundant with another national park unit or redundant with a place managed by another entity? So this is what we analyze for the suitability criterion. And on this slide, we have a photo of Joshua trees at Joshua Tree National Park in California. All right, the third criterion in the study involves a thorough analysis of the site's feasibility as a potential national park unit. To meet this criterion, the area must be of sufficient size and appropriate configuration to ensure long-term protection of the resource and visitor enjoyment. And it must be capable of efficient administration by the National Park Service at a reasonable cost. Other important feasibility factors that we examine include the current land ownership of the site, acquisition costs, if any, life cycle maintenance costs, access, for example, how easily visitors can get to the site, any threats to the resource that we should be aware of, and staff or development requirements to administer the site. And on this slide, we show a map, Park Service map of the Reconstruction era National Historical Park in South Carolina, including the site's boundary and nearby roads. The fourth and final criterion involves an evaluation of the need for National Park Service management. This criterion states that a study area must demonstrate that direct management by the National Park Service is clearly superior to other management approaches. So in cases where a site is well managed and maintained, interpreted, open for public visitation, and the current management entity is essentially doing everything that the National Park Service would do, and would continue its management for the foreseeable future, a site might not meet this criterion. Alternatively, if the study analysis finds that there's something in the something that the National Park Service could do that would enhance the current function of the site in terms of its long-term preservation, access, interpretation, or education, this criterion could be met. As you can see, these criteria are designed to ensure that the National Park System includes only the most outstanding examples of the nation's natural and cultural resources. But these criterion also recognize that there are other management alternatives for preserving our nation's outstanding resources. And on this slide, we have an image of a National Park Service staff member in uniform speaking from a podium. All right. This slide summarizes the study process. So each site identified in the legislation will be evaluated both individually and collectively. We are currently in the first stage, public input and research. And then the study team will complete the analysis. And again, the resources in the study area must meet all 4 criteria to demonstrate an overall positive finding. When the study is complete, it will be submitted to Congress. And at that point, it'll be up to Congress or the president to take action or not. There isn't any timeline for further action from Congress or the president. And again, the completion of the study does not establish new park units. Only Congress or the president has the authority to designate new units of the national park system. I would also like to provide some information on the range of park unit management because we often get a lot of questions about this. So if the study area were to meet all 4 criteria, there are a range of management structures that a national park unit could operate under. And the 3 main categories are listed here on this slide. So first, 100% National Park Service ownership. So in that case, the Park Service is fully responsible for all park functions, including management and maintenance of the property within the park boundary, park operations, visitor programs, etc. Partner organizations may support the park, but have no management responsibility. And this is the type of management that is the case for most national park units, but not all. The second type is listed down below, jointly managed partnership parks. So in this structure, the National Park Service and an authorized partner or partners share responsibilities for ownership, management, maintenance, or operations via formal agreements. And this varies by park unit based on the specific needs for how jointly managed partnership parks should work. And then our third type is National Park System service management without ownership. Under this structure, the National Park Service doesn't own, administer, or maintain property within the park boundary. However, the NPS may use a leased facility or partner-owned facility via agreement for park operations. And I'll give an example of each of these types on the next couple slides. Okay, so for 100% NPS ownership and management, the example is Joshua Tree National Park in San Bernardino and Riverside counties in California. And so in this case, the NPS owns and manages over 700,000 acres and all the natural and cultural resources, facilities, and infrastructure within. The park's legislated boundary also includes almost 20,000 acres of non-federal lands that are not managed by the NPS, so not owned or managed by the NPS. And this park was initially established as a national monument through the Antiquities Act, and then later expanded several times and redesignated as a national park by Congress. And this evolution of boundary expansion is not uncommon for older parks like Joshua Tree. All right, so on this slide, a jointly managed partnership park is where, again, a partnering entity owns or manages a significant portion of the land or property within the authorized park boundary, and they make use of agreements with the National Park Service. So this example is Eby's Landing National Historical Reserve in Washington. So most of the land within the reserve is privately owned, with the rest in combination with a combination of local, state, and federal ownership. The Park Service has acquired some lands and easements critical to the preservation and interpretation of the reserve. And management of the reserve is guided by a 1988 interlocal agreement for the administration of the historical reserve. I will note that joint management partnerships are complex, demanding, and time intensive, but they can also be rewarding for the organizations involved, including the National Park Service. And here we have a photo of Ebey's Landing in Washington. All right, our third example of a jointly managed partnership park where NPS owns no property is this one, Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park in the San Francisco Bay Area. So the authorized park boundary includes World War II era factories, assembly structures, support facilities, and housing. And the park interprets this industrial site and tells the story of the World War II homefront effort nationwide. However, the National Park Service does not own any property here. Instead, the NPS cooperates with and provides technical assistance to owners of historic resources, including individuals, organizations, businesses, and nonprofit organizations to support the park's mission. And I'll also add that joint management partnership parks could exist because of language in the park's legislation or presidential proclamation, property deed or secretarial order, or park-initiated agreement, like a cooperative agreement or a cooperative management agreement, the lease of a partner-owned facility, or other documents that authorize a collaborative working relationship. All right. So just to share the study timeline, this slide includes the major steps. So listed first is data gathering stage. The study team has been gathering information over the past few months and will continue to do so through this spring. The second row is for public outreach, which is happening now. And then starting later this spring, the study team will analyze the 4 special resource study criteria and prepare the report. We anticipate finalizing the study findings in early 2027, so early next year. And then it's TBD of when this would happen, but the Secretary of Interior would transmit the study to Congress. The study will be made publicly available after congressional submission. And again, keep in mind, there's no specific timeline for the presentation to Congress. All right, now that we've introduced the study process and evaluation criteria, I would like to transition to the reason we're presenting today, which is that we are wanting your feedback. We have 5 prompting questions that show up on this slide, and these are things that we hope you'll take the time to respond to on our project website. So I'll read the questions. The first 2 are similar. So the first one is, what are the nationally significant cultural resources in the study area that should be managed and protected by the National Park Service? Second question is the same one, except we ask about nationally significant natural resources. Third question is, what role, if any, would you like the National Park Service to serve in the management of resources in the study area? Fourth question is, what concerns do you have that the National Park Service should be aware of and or address in the study process? And finally, do you have any other comments that you would like to share with us? There are 2 ways for you to submit your feedback. The first one is to enter your comments directly on the project website. And that is parkplanning.nps.gov/Los Angeles Coastal. There you can click on the Open for Comment button and respond to the 5 comment questions that I read on the previous slide. And we do encourage you to use the website to make your comments if at all possible. We believe this is maybe the easiest way for you to comment, and also the easiest way for us to receive your comments in an organized way. And I'll show you the screenshots about how to access the website in a moment. However, you also have the option to mail in your comments. The mailing address is listed here. I'll also show it at the end of the presentation and leave it up for a bit in case anyone needs to jot it down. And then the comment period opened on February 5th and will stay open through April 6th. All right, so how to use the project website. So this slide shows a screenshot of the home page. That link will take you there. So to submit comments, what you do is look for the open for comment link on the left-hand side. It's circled in red on the slide. Click on that. And there are a couple of clicks to get you to the right place. Once you click on that, you'll be taken to this screen titled Documents Open for Comment. There, click on the link that says February 2026 newsletter, which is circled in red on this slide. From there, you'll be taken to this screen that says February 2026 newsletter. And at this point, you'll click on one of those two Comment Now buttons. And that will take you directly to this page where you can start entering your information and typing in your answers to the questions. And when you're finished, make sure to press submit, and then we'll receive your feedback directly. I know that that's a bunch of clicking, so my colleague will also enter into the chat the most direct link to get there. And just wanted to say thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts and input for the benefit of the study. So this concludes our presentation on the special resource study. At this time, we will now transition to answering any questions that you may have. So at this point, I will hand things off to Wes, who will be running through the Q&A and moderating for us. And then I'll also invite my colleague, Carrie Miller, to join on screen to respond to questions with me.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Our first question is for you, Sarah. And someone asks...
Wait, do you want to go over the Q&A real quick first?
Oh, yes, of course. I apologize. So to ask a question in this format, you'll want to click on the Ask a Question button on the very bottom right corner of your screen. And once you click onto that, you will be able to view or hide the Q&A. And within that section, you can type out your question and enter it in, and it will be posted, and someone on our side will grab that and send it over to me, and I will be reading those questions to Carrie and or Sarah. So our first question is for you, Sarah. This question is about the need for NPS management specifically. This person asks, so to confirm, if an area is already managed by an agency like California State Parks, it won't be included.
No, that is not correct. Private property is excluded from the study area. However, so public property, such as California State Parks, lands are included in the study. And let's see. However, the state of California can request that or let us know that they do not want to be included in the study. You know, we have been asked by Congress to, the legislation says what areas we do need to study, but we will, if we receive comments from property owners, we will definitely include their thoughts in some of the analysis, like for instance, the need for direct NPS management. That criterion 4 is a place where we really do want to be informed by property owners and others.
Thank you, Sarah. The next question is also for you, Sarah. This question pertains to private property and private lands. Question reads, regarding the example you used, EBs, you mentioned that most of that NPS park unit is privately owned. Also, a significant part of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area includes private lands. So why not include any private lands in this Los Angeles Coastal Resources study? Especially since, for instance, some of the private lands near Ballona Creek, Baldwin Hills, and the Ballona Wetlands are on the state's 30 by 30 list that considers the possibility of acquiring and protecting lands for protection?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right that some, like I had in my example, for example, had mentioned that some national park boundaries include privately owned lands. In this case, we really didn't make sense for us to include like residential neighborhoods, for instance, because it would be highly unlikely that those areas would have resources that meet these really high standards for national significance. However, this is part of the reason that why we're coming to all of you and asking for your feedback. If you are aware of, and I guess I previously I had said, if you are aware of public lands that would fall within the legislated boundary, so that description from the legislation of the study area, because we can really only study according to the legislation, please feel free to submit those ideas to us through the project website. As you can see, I labeled the map as the preliminary study boundary. This was our best estimate based on the research that we've done so far. But you all are experts in the area, and we do really welcome your feedback on other potential sites. And our team will take a look at that and consider that.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, the next question is also for you. This is a question about national significance and the example that we used. The question is, you mentioned the lighthouse, but it is not in the study area. So why mention it as meeting one of the criteria?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, that may have been a misunderstanding. In the slides, I was just showing other examples of national park units that, could met some of those criteria. So you are correct. The Point Loma Lighthouse is not within our study area boundary. So we're not doing anything with that, and it is already part of the national monument there.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Next question is about some specific elements of the study area. The question is, how would you consider marinas and piers? And that is also for you, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. I would consider marinas and piers to be part of our study area, if they're in the general beach areas that we were looking at. Again, property owners can tell us differently, but to me, when we look at the legislation and it talks about, the coastal area, those really are part of that area.
Next question is also for you, Sarah. This is a question about city land, and it is simply, is city land included?
Yes. The answer to that is yes, and there are a number of cities that owned land within the study area. So we've reached out to all property owners and have been able to meet with many of them, and others we have meetings coming up, or we're getting feedback from those property owners. But yes, city land is included if it's publicly owned.
Thank you much, Sarah. Our next question is for you, Carrie. This is a question about NPS management. The question is, if the sites are managed by the NPS, does that mean it is now under federal control? Do you need a park pass? Can they charge for parking? Can they authorize drilling?
So when sites are managed by NPS, I assume that means they're directly owned and operated. And so those are the very specific areas where NPS has an ownership role. And in those cases, they would be under federal control because the National Park Service would own and manage those particular parcels. Now, for our existing parks, they don't all require park passes. Many national park units do not require a park pass. And whether they charge parking, it really varies park to park and places within that park. So it varies widely from many places. And parking in national park units where there's no fee and others where there may be. It really depends across the entire system. Can they authorize drilling? So if the National Park Service is a direct land management entity, whether they have mineral rights and can authorize drilling is very specific to that particular parcel and what kind of authorities the national park has over that area. So it's really determined on a case by case basis, depending on what kind of congressional authorities are granted in that case, and it varies widely across the system.
Thank you, Carrie. Carrie, this next question is also for you. This is a question about NPS management activities and what they entail. Question reads, will the NPS be involved in some restoration work that would benefit the health of the water environment on Venice Beach? For instance, much of the stormwater runoff that flows from Venice into the ocean is polluted and causes harm. The restoration of an estuary at the Rose Avenue outflow could have a very beneficial impact. Would the NPS be able to participate in that restoration through science and funding?
So that suggestion and some identification of some of the issues that person is identifying, that's a great comment for us to know about. So we encourage you to write that into the project website on the comment page. That's information and good suggestions for us to consider. Now, if a national park unit were authorized, that would be the future activities at that level of detail would be determined at a future time through the park general management planning process and through consultation with any of the other agencies within its authorized boundary. So that would really be determined at a future time if a park is authorized. The study doesn't get into that level of detail.
Thank you, Carrie. Next question is about comparable units within the national park system. Are there other, this is a question for you, Carrie. Are there other active beach units in the NPS system? How might the day-to-day use of the beach change for local residents?
There are many national park units that have active beaches. You can think of all the national seashores within the national park system, from Cape Cod to Cape Hatteras to Cape Lookout to Point Reyes and many, many others. Channel Islands is nearby. So, and actually Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, until recently, they did not have a direct management of any beaches until just December. They've acquired their first parcel of beach. So the way they are managed is all very different depending on the ownership. And let's take a look at your question. What else is in there? Sorry, Wes, could you remind me of the rest of the question
it's,
here?
are there any
How might
active beach-
day-to-day?
Yes, exactly. How might
Okay.
the day-to-day use of the beach change for local residents?
It depends on what the previous ownership was. So if it went from, say, privately owned parcel to the National Park Service owning it for the first time under government ownership, that may change. However, in many cases, like Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, that has a very large authorized boundary, and the majority of the beaches within that boundary are owned and managed by other governmental agencies, such as the city of Malibu or the city of Santa Monica. Those are entirely run, managed, and operated by those other governmental entities. And the National Park Service does not, just having that designation does not change how those beach areas are managed. So that's one local example.
Thank you, Carrie. Next question is also for you. This is a question again about comparable units and maybe a comparable case. It is asked, thank you for 2 very thorough briefings. I would like to draw your attention to the VA West Los Angeles property, specifically the area located north of Wilshire Boulevard, for potential inclusion in the study area. The property was deeded to the federal government in 1888 as the Pacific Branch National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. In 2014, the Pacific Branch was added to the NRHP, National Register of Historic Places, as a historic district, Criterion 1. Since 2013, 5 federal judges and two Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General reports have concluded that Veterans Affairs has violated federal law in terms of managing the property. I believe an operating structure similar to the Presidio Trust would be superior to Veterans Affairs' current management. How would you classify the Presidio in San Francisco? Joint management or NPS without ownership? Thanks again.
Thanks for the question and the concern. In that case, that is out of our study area. So it's really out of this particular study's jurisdiction. We have to adhere very closely to the legislation and the geographic areas it directs us to. So those specific areas that Sarah pointed out on the map, that we're limited to only looking at that within that area because that's what Congress has authorized us to study. So it sounds like that may be outside of that specific area. We still encourage you to go ahead and enter your comments just so we can have it and track it. We'll take a close look and see whether there is any overlap within that area. Separate from that, I would say classify the Presidio in San Francisco, that is part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which has a much larger area. And you're right in that there is a partnership framework there. And the National Park Service and the Presidio Trust work in collaboration, often on collaborative projects. So there are examples of joint management partnerships within that framework of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area.
Thank you, Carrie. Sarah, the next question is for you. This is a question about a comparable site, but it's more natural resources focused. The question is, what about La Brea Tar Pits as a potential site? It is close to, but probably not within the current study area. Should I submit that through the website, or will you record that through this meeting?
Yes, please submit all comments like that through the website. We aren't going to be taking the notes from this meeting and using that in our analysis, at least not formally. So the best way really is to submit it through the website. And I would say, similar to the last question, the La Brea Tar Pits is outside of the study area, so it's not part of our study boundary.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, the next question is for you. This is more of a process question than anything else, asking if we submit info regarding the significance of area or areas within the study to Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, Chicano, Latino Americans, LGBTQ Americans, will it be considered or not? We see the NPS is now mandated to remove references to these groups in its signage.
So absolutely, yes, submit that information. It is considered in this study process. And it will be included in step 1 when the study team considers aspects of national significance. That has not changed. Secretarial Order 3431 pertains to existing park units, so not in this case for studies.
Thank you, Carrie. Sarah, the next question is for you. This is also about our process and how we're going about it. This question reads, I recommend more public engagement in addition to direct engagement with local agencies, tribes, and NGOs. 1 month of public comment is not enough time to answer these questions. For example, it is difficult to pick a preferred management system if we don't fully understand the potential consequences of adding Santa Monica Bay as a new unit of the National Park System.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So as far as more public engagement, in addition to direct engagement with local agencies, tribes, and NGOs. Okay, yeah. So we are definitely reaching out to agencies, tribes, and organizations separately from these public meetings. The public comment period is actually 2 months. And I would say that it is longer than other public comment periods that the NPS typically does. So we did try to make that time frame long and able to allow folks to the time to respond. And I totally understand that it's difficult to pick a preferred management system if you don't understand the potential consequences. Share with us, what you see, and even questions that you have. And I will say that, for agencies, property owners, please feel free to reach out separately as well if you have concerns about your property. And Carrie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think your answer was thorough. I'll add one element of this is that this is really an informational intake process for these 2 months of an open comment period where we're seeking your input about nationally significant resources and any other aspect of the criteria that we mentioned. With the ultimate responsibility of identifying the most efficient and effective alternative, if one is developed based on what is the results of the criteria, the National Park Service Director holds that responsibility to identify the most efficient and effective alternative if the study gets to that point.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Carrie. Sarah, the next question is for you. Also speaking to national significance and how it is determined. The question reads, would a lighthouse and adjacent grounds and buildings, which was acquired by a city via the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, be considered as a potential candidate for this study?
Yes, I'm not sure which lighthouse and grounds are being proposed here, but if they fall within the study area description in the legislation, then yes, absolutely. We'd be happy to consider those and evaluate those properties. So please send us that comment on the project website with specifics.
Thank you, Sarah. As of right now, we do not have any additional questions entered. Certainly, if folks have anything on their minds that they would like to ask, please do feel free to drop it in the chat at this point. While we wait, Sarah, Carrie, if there was anything you would like to add, I'm happy to give you the chance to do so.
I do see that there's a question about reaching out to the Venice Arbor Committee of the Venice Neighborhood Council. And I will say that the Venice Neighborhood Council has reached out. So thank you for that suggestion. They have said that they would provide comments, and that is wonderful.
I do see a note here saying that it seems that the organizer may have disabled the new discussions. I'm not quite sure if that's the case because new questions do continue to appear, so apologize to that user for running into any difficulty, but it does appear that the process is still working overall.
Oh, and let me just so I'm seeing the rest of the comment from the Venice Arbor Committee, and they provided an email address. And so, yes, I'd be happy to reach out if you have additional information on natural and historical resources. Thank you.
Next question is also for you, Sarah. This is a question about natural resources. Someone asks, have you considered the offshore marina canyons as part of the study?
Currently, we have not included any offshore areas in our study. However, I do think that some folks have already mentioned some areas that are really close to the coastline, I think in the San Pedro area. And those may very well be appropriate for us to include in the study. So I would encourage you to let us know what specific area you're talking about, and then also if you have any information about the national significance of that resource.
Great, thank you, Sarah. The next question is also for you, Sarah. This is a question related to feasibility specifically. Question is the economic impact considered? Redondo Beach, waterfront, pier, and harbor are hugely impactful to the city.
Let's see. So, I mean, as part of our feasibility criterion, there's a lot that actually goes into that consideration. Some of the economic impact is, obviously this is a very highly productive economic area. So we do look at broad strokes for that. So yes, I would say that we look at it. I mean, another thing to note is that I think if let's say, Congress acted and designated this area as a unit of the national park system, we don't know what would be said about property ownership, but typically a partnership, joint management partnership park would most likely make the most sense for this area, and ownership of property would likely not change. So in that case, any economic activity derived by those property owners things would remain the same. So funds wouldn't be diverted to the federal government, for instance, in that case. Carrie, do you want to add anything there?
Nope, I think you covered it well. Thanks, Sarah.
Indeed, thank you, Sarah. Sarah, the next question is also for you. This is a question about the study area boundary. How is it that the Baldwin Hills is part of the study as it is not on or near the coast? Also, why has a section of the Palos Verdes Peninsula been excluded?
Yeah, great question. And I can share, maybe I'll share my screen again. 1 second here. All right, let me share the screen. So this slide shows the study area map, and then also in bold, the legislative text. So the legislation specifically calls for the study to include the areas in and around Ballona Creek and the Baldwin Hills. And then also the San Pedro section of the city of Los Angeles, excluding the Port of Los Angeles north of Crescent Avenue. So that's why the Baldwin Hills is incorporated and Ballona Creek, and that's also why the area that is not part of the city of Los Angeles and San Pedro is not included in the study boundary.
We did get another question right after that about why Palos Verdes was excluded from the study. So thank you, Sarah, for answering that. Our next question is also for you, Sarah. This is about jurisdiction and logistical related issues. This question reads, have you reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that owns Ballona Creek, and could that federal land be transferred to the National Park Service as a recommendation in the NPS study?
Yeah, Army Corps of Engineers is on our stakeholder contact list, so we are reaching out to them. The study doesn't actually recommend whether, who owns what property. So we would include information about the feasibility of the study area, but beyond that, recommendations about transfer of property would be up to legislation or future agreements. Carrie, did you want to add to that as well?
I think you have it. through this study process, the National Park Service will consult with other federal agencies within the study area, including the Army Corps of Engineers, and seek their input as well as others. So, we'll see what develops based on the conversations had and feedback heard.
Thank you both. Sarah, the next question is for you. This is a clarification on a previous question. This commenter clarifies, the National Historic Lighthouse Program lighthouse I was referring to is the Point Fermin Lighthouse in San Pedro.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for providing that additional info. Yes, the Point Fermin Lighthouse is included within the study boundary. So we will be looking at that. And then I know like the map doesn't really, it's kind of hard to tell from the map, but there are those adjacent lands that are publicly owned adjacent to the lighthouse. And we have received some comments already that there may be nationally significant resources in those lands and to take a look at those. So the study team will take a look at whether we should include those in the study area as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is about just, again, study area boundary and where it extends to. And this is a question for you, Sarah. Could a recommendation for 1 mile out to sea, as is the case for Channel Islands National Park, to include Submarine Canyon in that regard?
Definitely include that in your comments to us and let us know, about the national significance of that submarine canyon, and the study team will take a look and consider whether or not to include that in the area.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is for you, Sarah. This relates to what materials are available for public review. Question is simply, is it possible to see the slideshow that was shared earlier? I missed the first 10 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. There's two resources for you. So if you go to the project website, which I think we've shared that in the chat, and let's see, you click on document list, and then you'll see, I think it's titled like February 2026 presentation, and those are the presentation slides that we shared today. Also available on the project homepage is a link to a recording of this meeting that was held on February 11th. So the presentation that I gave today was nearly identical. I hope it was identical to the February 11th presentation. So you can actually watch the presentation. That's the first 30 minutes of that recording. And then we also will be posting this meeting's recording to the project website, but it will take about a week or so just to get it fully accessible.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question for you, just asking, I think, about general areas and how those factor into our study area boundary. Question for you, Sarah. Could you further describe what types of areas would be appropriate beyond the existing study area identified in the bill text? Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, what types of areas would be appropriate beyond the existing study area? Yeah, so we really do need to stick to the legislation when we identify the study area. So if you propose something that's clearly not within the boundaries of what is described there, we're not going to be able to include it in the study. We do need to, keep the study to the legislation. So if, for the coastline, if there are, what I think would maybe be most appropriate, if there are public properties that potentially contain nationally significant natural or cultural resources, and they're really directly adjacent to the coastline, like to the beach, either maybe in the water side or maybe in the inland side, those are the types of properties that I would say would be most likely to be included into the study area.
Thank you, Sarah. Question for you, Carrie, about talking about Palos Verdes Peninsula. If people from the Palos Verdes Peninsula are interested in having their beautiful coastal and biodiverse lands included, can't they ask for this? The original legislation started 11 years ago, and things might have changed in terms of interest from the local governments.
Yeah, thanks. My answer will be a continuation of what Sarah just said about we are required and restricted to study only the area directed by the study legislation. But I wanted to just speak briefly to the past study, the legislative history. So even though there are over 11 years of legislation that ultimately landed in the bill that was passed in 2022, we are bound by that final bill that was passed in 2022. So we can't go beyond that geographic area described in the study, but certainly you could try to pursue changes to the study law. That any citizen has the right to pursue additional legislation through their local representatives. Any citizen can do that. If you want to go ahead and share a comment, we can compile it within our comment report as well. That would be an additional area, even though it's outside of the scope of the study area.
Great, thank you, Carrie. Sarah, another question for you. This one about national significance and the study area boundary. Question reads, Village Green, aka Baldwin Hills Village, is a National Historical Landmark and is directly contiguous to the red map boundary of the Baldwin Hills. So could a recommendation extend the red line of the map to include the Village Green landmark into the park boundary? Diverse migratory native songbird migration finds the Village Green landmark with the trees found in the landmark as ecological and natural habitat.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. Please, again, please submit that in your comments for sure. But I will say that the Village Green, a couple reasons that it was not included in the study area was that one, it is privately owned, and two, that the residents there do not allow for public access. So those are the reasons why it's not included in the study area.
Thank you, Sarah. We have yet again come to the end of the currently submitted questions. Again, we will make time if folks do have other questions that they wish to submit.
Well, maybe it is time to end our. Oh wait, maybe we do have another.
We have one that just came in. Yes, it's
Okay, go.
This is a question for you, Sarah, talking about the different scenarios. It reads, do you think that it is more likely this NPS fits the two scenarios presented by you as either no ownership with leases or the jointly managed partnerships?
I definitely would say that the jointly managed partnership would be the most likely, whether or not, and it might be no NPS ownership. I don't know where, there would be that need. I guess we'll have to see from property owners, and that's part of the evaluation that we'll do. Carrie, do you want to add to that?
I think it's a little too soon to tell. I think we go through our filtering process for this study, starting with the 4 criteria that Sarah outlined, and you can go back and into the video and also onto the website and the newsletter to see those criteria again. But once you filter through all the resources and see which resources meet all four criteria, only then can we really start thinking about potential management scenarios and whether we could see a range of scenarios, maybe ownership makes sense for certain resources for which there is no current management entity, or conversely, places that are well managed but maybe welcome a partnership role by the National Park Service. And maybe that would be one of the latter two options mentioned, a partnership park or without any ownership. So I think I need to wait and see based on all the scholarship and research and science that the team is collecting and you all are providing. It's very helpful. So we'll see where we go. And thank you for all of your good ideas and information.
And in fact, in that conversation, a few additional questions have been posted. A new question for you, Sarah, again, talking about the study area boundary and what is and is not included. I'm still not understanding why the beaches are in this study. I know it's in the legislation, but the beaches are already managed.
Yeah, fair question. And I think you answered your question there is it's because of the legislation, and that's why we are studying it. And then property owners are, we've asked them to let us know, what they think of that. And what, that question of what role, if any, should the National Park Service have in management of these sites. So we are hoping to hear back, and that will really directly inform our study.
Next question is also for you, Sarah. This is a question about natural resources in the study area and collaboration between the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service. The question reads, does the NPS confer with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about the species on the endangered species that are present in these areas?
Yes, the Fish and Wildlife Service is part of our contact list, and as we do research and trying to understand what the nationally significant resources might be, that is part of our analysis.
Next question for you is for you, Sarah. This is about the National Park Service study team. The question reads, do the study authors include people living in or near the study area?
Yeah. Part of our team does include some folks living in the study area. The primary authors do not live in the study area, though.
Thank you, Sarah. As of right now, we do not have any additional questions. Certainly more may come in. We do have a comment that the beaches are managed, but not well. Venice has very polluted water, and the management of the waste management plants needs to be altered.
Yeah, put those comments in the project website. Much appreciated.
Do have another question here. What are some of the possible outcomes of the study? And I believe that that's probably best answered by you, Sarah.
Absolutely. So the study will evaluate the sites against those 4 criteria, and we'll have, that full evaluation. Then the study goes to the Secretary of Interior, that may add recommendations for Congress. So the outcome of the study is, it will be this completed study presented to Congress, and Congress can choose to act on it or not act on it, and same with the president could choose to act on it or not act on it. It remains a study no matter what. We have a list on our special resources study website. I think there's like 92 special resources studies that have been completed over the last 20 years. So those are always available for future action or no action.
Thank you, Sarah. We have another question for you, Sarah, about NPS management. The question reads, could you envision interpretation rangers being funded to visit seashore with public to explore the tidal life on the pilings under the piers of sea stars, anemones, anemones and tidal zonation? And I ask because college professors take the marine biology classes to the piers.
I mean, for national park units, there's usually a variety of interpretive opportunities, highlighting the reasons that national park unit exists and was created. So I love this question. It's very poetic, and exciting. So sure.
One final question for you here, Sarah. If a park were designated along the Los Angeles coastal area, would the National Park Service acquire the land?
Right, and that's totally up to the legislation that is, passed by Congress. But my belief is that there probably would be very little acquisition for this area. Carrie, do you want to add? Maybe I'm getting too far ahead here again.
Yeah, no, you're right. It would be entirely dependent on the authorization by Congress too, and what the authorization for that national park unit to do, and it could include authorization to acquire lands when there is an opportunity to, if those lands and properties met the stated purpose and significance of the park, which would be outlined in the national significance and the legislation itself, and only when there would be an opportunity for acquisition by a willing seller, by donation, and using donated or appropriated funds. So there are a lot of conditions that would need to be met, even if Congress were to designate and authorize acquisition.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Our next question is for you, Sarah. It's more of a comment, really. But this person inquires, given the political climate, if the beaches are NPS managed, I'm concerned that the beaches won't be adequately protected.
Yes, please send us your comments about this. One of the things that we do analyze in the feasibility is threats to the resources. So, please share your thoughts on this via our comment website.
Thank you, Sarah. There is another question for you, Sarah, about resources within the study area and how those might be used under NPS management. Question reads, what are some potential places NPS could lease for a visitor center or several visitor centers if funding is provided, as in the Rosie the Riveter National Historical Park?
I can't say that I would know the answer to that question at this point in time. Even if legislation was passed designating a national park unit, it often takes time for the national park to kind of get set up, and time to even seek funding for the park unit. And so decisions like that would likely be made after after a site was designated and started to get set up. It could be sometimes in legislation that may be identified as well, visitor center locations, but often it's really something that comes much later on. So we won't be addressing that at all in the study.
Thanks, Sarah. Carrie, a question for you. This question is a little more general about what happens following the study. It reads, what happens if the Los Angeles coastal area is designated a unit of the National Park System?
So when there is a designation by Congress, for example, usually it outlines certain conditions that need to be met. So you start with the congressional legislation, which authorizes the establishment of the park. It may identify certain conditions to be met, minimum conditions such as a minimum footprint or property to be acquired. Only then, when those minimum requirements are met, can the Secretary of the Interior publish a Federal Register notice to announce that the park unit has been established. At that point, a budget can be submitted and requested through appropriations for the National Park Service. So until that point, there may not be additional funding for a park. It often takes a long time, 10 years or longer, to what we call stand up a new park. Staffing is often minimal. Maybe one or two to start. And really, we borrow funding from other park units across the system, all 433 units. So we really kind of carve out a budget from our existing budget in order to support the park while we're having it stood up and estimating a budget for its long-term future. But it's a long process and often benefits from the support from the partners and community members.
Thank you, Carrie. Next question is for you, Sarah. Again, really thinking about next steps and what happens after the study is completed. Question reads, will we see the results of the study as soon as it is completed? How much time after is it completed will be presented to Congress? And then a question about aspects of the study area. Are Marina del Rey and the Venice Canals included in the boundary?
The study will become publicly available when it is presented to Congress and not before that. There is no specific timeline for when that presentation to Congress will be made. So that's a little bit unknown. Marina del Rey and the Venice Canals are not currently included in the study area.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question for you, Sarah, talking about private parcels and partnerships in particular. The question reads, there are numerous private lands on the California 30 by 30 list that could be acquired, again with a willing seller. We have two right now. Maybe a partnership between the state and the National Park Service?
Great. Yeah, send us that information. You can also submit your contact information if we have follow-up questions.
Thank you, Sarah. And a question for you, Carrie. What advantages would we have if the NPS were to take over this study area versus now?
Well, generally, when a national park unit is authorized, it allows for federal funding to be spent on resource conservation, preservation, interpretation, education, and visitor access. So those are all the general things that national park units provide for the significant resources that they are authorized to protect. Now, what would actually come and how big a footprint or how large an area that would be is really determined by Congress or the president using the Antiquities Act if that were the avenue taken. So it's too early to come up with potential management scenarios to think about how big that would be. But the benefit would be the National Park Service applying its mission under the Organic Act and later amendments on resource preservation and conservation.
Thank you, Carrie. Again, as of now, we do not have any additional questions.
All right. Well, maybe we'll wrap up. If any more questions come in, of course, we can stop and answer those. But just want to thank everyone so much for participating and attending and being willing to share your knowledge and expertise and any resources that you have with the National Park Service. we are looking forward to, completing the study and taking the next steps. And it's just great to know that we have so many interested folks involved. So with that, thank you to Carrie and Wes as well. And we will say goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.